everyone, I'm Robin Cartwright.
And I'm Liz Bernstein.
And for this episode of Martin County Matters, we're going to discuss PFAS. Now, we had a Martin County Moment episode that you gave some really great information where we could learn about things of PFAS. And PFAS, as a reminder, are per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, also known as forever chemicals. And as we discussed, they are found in 99% of us, not on us, but actually in us.
Yeah, probably on us too.
Also,
but
yeah.
Yes. So when Robin and I started looking into this topic, there is a lot of information out there, and it really matters the source of the information because obviously a lot of the companies that produce these forever chemicals have a vested interest in keeping them on the market and keeping them in use. And so we thought it was helpful to give a little bit of history and background and kind of lead us to where we are now.
Right.
So PFAS did not exist. They're a chemical that we created, and actually DuPont was the first company to create these forever chemicals, and they used it starting in 1946 in the advent of Teflon, right? And so anything non-stick, right, I think is now the word used, right, because Teflon is now technically illegal, but we'll get to that in a second. And then in 1950, so I guess let me back up. What I think was astounding to me, and maybe you as well, is for how long 3M and DuPont knew that these chemicals were dangerous and that were causing problems, but they purposely did not bring that information either to local water utilities and or to the EPA.
Or their employees.
Exactly. And so that's kind of what we are really focusing on here for this history. So as early as 1950, 3M did a study with mice, and they found that the PFAS chemicals actually build up in the blood. In 1956, Stanford University also did a study about PFAS, and in that study, they found that the PFAS actually bind to proteins in our blood, right? And then in 1963, 3M actually designated in their own work manual, the technical manual, that PFAS were toxic. So, I don't know that every employee reads the full manual, but as early as 1963, they actually noted that these chemicals were toxic.
But kept that information internal,
exactly,
as we'll find out later in the history.
Yeah, and didn't actually alert their employees to it. It was like they just slipped it into the manual.
Right.
So this is not the entire timeline. These are just ones that we've pulled out. The entire timeline can be found, and we'll put the link below, but this entire timeline can be found on the Environmental Working Group website, which is ewg.org. So in 1966, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, actually rejected a DuPont request to actually use PFAS as a food additive. And so as early as 1966, the FDA knew that we shouldn't actually eat these chemicals, right?
And that they affected our liver.
And exactly. And so the Food and Drug Administration said, no, we're not going to have you do that because we know it affects people's livers. So there was also, studies done in the prior years about that. And then in 1973, DuPont actually finally showed liver damage, not from ingesting PFAS, but just for exposure from food packaging, right? So bringing us back to that part of our Martin moment where 2 states have actually outlawed PFAS to be used in food packaging. It's really sad that 48 of our states, including Florida, we can still use it, even though we know exposure in food packaging from 1973 causes liver damage.
Yeah, and Washington and Maine, as a reminder, are the 2 states that currently have outlawed PFAS in your food packaging.
So in 1977, 3M found PFAS. So you might be seeing some PFOS and PFAS. They're the same class of chemicals. And so I'm referring to them and this entire class of chemicals as PFAS, but this entire class contains about 15,000 different chemicals, okay? So There's been lots of talk about different definitions and how the EPA keeps changing their definition of PFAS. And this is why their exact definition really matters, because this class of chemicals, this PFAS, really contains so many individual chemicals.
Right.
So in 1977, the one specific chemical, PFO, that is in Scotchgard, 3M found it is more toxic than anticipated. Did your parents have anything with Scotchgard?
I can remember my mom coming home with things and spraying things so that they were protected and safe, and, you know, kind of like how you learn about things about aerosols, right? And the chemicals that you need to keep aerosols aerosol-like so that they can do what they're supposed to do. I mean, it's really unfortunate because, yes, I do think a majority of us probably had furniture with Scotchgard.
Right, and our parents didn't know that they were putting something toxic in the house, which I think is really...
But DuPont and 3M knew.
Right, and that's where I think really I get so upset, is that I know that if parents had better information, they would act accordingly, right? But they didn't have this information. So in 78, 3M also found lesions, not only in spleens and bone marrow and in lymph nodes of animals in one study. And then in 1978, the specific PFAS chemical used in Teflon, 3M concluded that that was toxic. In 1981, 3M and DuPont both reassigned their female workers that worked in the plant with PFAS chemicals to different departments that no longer worked with PFAS chemicals. And that's because there was a study done where it actually impacts the eyes of fetuses, right? So they didn't want those birth defect risks coming true on their female employees. So again, didn't do anything to the outside world, just relocated their female employees to different areas where they were no longer directly working with PFAS. In 1984, DuPont first detected PFAS in the water supply of a town in Ohio, and they did not alert the local utilities or water treatment facility. So again, knowing that they're putting toxic chemicals that cause damage in the water as early as 1984 and not doing anything about it.
Right.
In 1987, a 3M study on animals found tumors. So basically, not just in one specific area of the body, but really tumors just growing from the presence of PFAS. In 89, a study found that their workers had elevated rates of cancer compared to the general population. And the same thing in 1992 happened with DuPont. And so it's really appalling that it wasn't until 1998 when they first alerted the EPA that there were actually issues with these chemicals and that they were extremely toxic. And just to elaborate a little bit on that, when you're told that certain chemicals have been banned from the United States, certain PFAS chemicals, they're really only talking about a few of those 15,000 chemicals. So the one in Scotchgard and the one or two in Teflon have been banned. You are no longer allowed to produce those in a plant in the United States or, put them on any products. But as we know, we import a lot of our goods, actually, and it is not illegal to import goods with those chemicals. So I've read some things, especially with this being in the news, that, they're banned, so it's not such a big deal.
Right.
But yeah, only those 3 or 4 specific compounds are banned, not the entire class of PFAS chemicals. Those are actually, as we noted in our moment, quite prevalent throughout a lot of different consumer products.
Right, and not just consumer products, but the whole reason this matters to us, not just because of the toxicity of the chemicals themselves, but because of the impact that they have. In 1989, the City of Stuart started buying its firefighting products, its foam, from 3M. And so what does that mean for our community? That means every time that a fire retardant was used in the City of Stuart, chances are it contained these
Chemicals.
products and these chemicals. And so in 2016, the EPA officially identified PFAS in the city of Stuart in the drinking water. And so you may say, well, they've since remedied it, or I don't live in the city of Stuart. If at any point you decided to go downtown.
Right. If you had dinner and didn't get bottled water literally anywhere in the city of Stuart,
you could have potentially been exposed. We're not saying that you were exposed, but obviously it's been documented and well known that PFAS did exist. And in fact, 2014, the highest identified level of PFAS in water were identified at 180 parts per trillion. Now you may say, well, what does that matter? What makes it safe? So if you'd like to explain, because this is math.
Yeah, I'm the math one. So I think this is really funny because, actually it's not funny, it's sad, but you either laugh or you cry, right? So there is a large discussion in environmental policy about safe versus legal. Right. And so I think it's really important to point out that just because something might be legal doesn't mean it's actually the optimal amount to be safe for your body. So,
and that everybody's body is different, because if you're immune compromised or if you have some kind of disease that may be impacted by these, I mean, I think it's important to note that even safe at that point may not be safe for everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. And we're all different, right? So exactly, we're not sure how everyone would react. So this little square has been pulled from the Environmental Working Group's tap water database, and I highly encourage you to go to their website and put your zip code in and look through. They're currently updating it for more from the more recent data. But what we have up here now is what's current in the database. And so you can see that this PFAS, and the full name is there, in the City of Stuart's water was 160 times the Environmental Working Group's safe limit, okay? And so you can see that their safe limit, which is right under, is 1 ppt, and that stands for parts per trillion, okay? So the Stuart utility at that time, when that water sample was taken, was 160 times the 1 part per trillion. Now the proposed legal limit, as you can see, is 4 ppt, which this actually means is that there is not currently a safe or legal neither defined by the EPA for PFAS. And so this is really a guess because it's the proposed legal limit that the Congress is currently debating on. Mm-hmm. The amount of that is 1 drop in an Olympic-sized pool. And that would be technically the safe amount.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Sort of. It's math.
It's math. So what you need to know, though, is that there is no legal limit, safe and or legal, right? And so, but what the Environmental Working Group and other, like Northeastern has a PFAS project going on, and other reputable organizations have come that there really are no safe levels, right? Which is why it's 1 part per trillion is the quote unquote safe amount, because any amount is really what they're saying. Any amount is toxic.
Right. And so this leads us back to Martin County. So the City of Stuart was part of a larger lawsuit along with 300 other communities against 3M and some others. And so the total settlement that was derived from that lawsuit was $10.3 billion. And the City of Stuart is hoping from that to gain $100 million. And what that means for us as a community, we can't say. I know part of it will pay for the reverse osmosis treatment plant that we'll talk about in a later episode, because that really is the only effective way to truly treat PFAS in your water. But we will discuss that with you at a later date. Thank you for joining us for this Martin County Matters episode.